whatever happens, this is a net loss for Zelenskyy, a net loss for Europe. And it has to be, whatever happens, a net win for Putin, right? This is what Putin has wanted to do from the beginning.
They're going to get together, carve up Ukraine between themselves, and then say to Zelenskyy, are you accepting this? And if Zelenskyy says no, Trump will say, well, you just want this war to go on, like he did when the two of them met at the White House. You can imagine that if Donald Trump is saying, I mean, you can keep the land you've taken, President Xi in China is going to be thinking, oh, Taiwan, looking nice now.
As far as the West has been concerned, he and Russia have been pariahs.
President Putin, I believe, wants to see peace, and Zelenskyy wants to see peace. Now, President Zelenskyy has to get all of his everything he needs, because he's going to have to get ready to sign something, and I think he is working hard to get that done. Some swapping, it's complicated. It's actually nothing easy. It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back. We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both.
The swapping of land for the betterment of both? Ukraine is the one giving away land, not Russia. So how can it be good for Ukraine? There is a growing suspicion that this Friday's summit between Putin and Trump is going to agree something that Vladimir Zelenksyy could never accept. And if that's the outcome, what happens next? Welcome to the News Agents. It's John in London.
And it's Lewis in Las Vegas.
Sorry, where?
I'm in Las Vegas, John. Blackjack is a hell of a game.
Why? Why are you there?
Well, you know how much I love poker.
So it says that Las Vegas is the ultimate adult playground, an uncensored paradise lined with streets of casinos, resorts and endless nightlife options. What did you do last night?
I didn't sleep. For all the wrong reasons, I'm afraid to say. No, in all seriousness, look, I mean, as tempting as it will be to spend many an evening at Caesar's Palace over the next couple of days, I mean, it is actually 6:30 in the morning here, so the chances of my being able to sustain that feels limited at this time. We're here actually properly because there is, starting tomorrow, the world's biggest, North America's biggest, AI conference is getting underway. It's a huge event, and AI is a story that we wanted to explore in a little bit more detail on the show for a long time. We've talked about it, John, we've talked about it on the show. But I mean, I felt for a long time that the way that AI is covered in much of the media, the British media anyway, is sort of so superficial. It sort of either goes to, oh my God, it's going to change all of our lives because we're all going to have an AI doctor and it's all going to be brilliant. Or potentially, it's going to be the apocalypse. So we're trying to do a bit of reporting where we want to show how profound these changes already are in North America, because we're behind the curve of it in the UK and Europe, particularly on the economic front. And sometimes we talk about it as if like, oh, AI, it's going to take all of our jobs in 5 years or 10 years or whatever it happens to be. This transformation, economic transformation, is happening right now. Huge layoffs in all sorts of industries across North America. It's a story that we're going to be exploring this week and bringing you reporting on over the next couple of weeks on the show. As well as the blackjack, of course.
If it had been in Scunthorpe, would you have been as keen to go?
Hey, bad choice, because I've actually, unlike you, John Sopel, done some reporting for the show in Scunthorpe, if you recall. So, yes, swivel on that.
As they say in Las Vegas.
As they say, quite.
Well, let's talk about what's happening on Friday in Alaska, in Anchorage. No doubt you'll be wangling a flight up to Anchorage very soon to be reporting from there.
No, I would. No. I would never do that.
I mean,
never
it
take
really
advantage of the
is
situation.
kind of the most extraordinary thing that Trump has agreed to meet Putin. Putin seemed to want the meeting. It looks like, I don't know, that they're going to get together, carve up Ukraine between themselves, and then say to Zelenskyy, are you accepting this? And if Zelenskyy says no, Trump will say, well, you just want this war to go on, like he did when the two of them met at the White House. It looks like there's very hard to see how anything is a win for Zelenskyy that comes out of this.
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, the White House, Vance, the vice president, is still briefing that they are trying to set up a meeting. They would like to see a sort of tripartite meeting between Trump, Putin, and Zelenskyy. Whether that's the thing that's going to take place in Alaska, we're still not entirely sure where in Alaska it's going to be this Friday. Whether that's that meeting or a subsequent meeting, dunno. Clearly, this is exactly the thing. Big picture, whatever they discuss And whatever the outcome of things on Friday, and we can discuss actually how it's hard to see what those outcomes are likely to be. But whatever happens, this is a net loss for Zelenskyy, a net loss for Europe. The thing that they have feared and tried to fight against and to try and ensure that didn't happen all through the course of the year, ever since that, the terrible, fateful blow-up meeting that there was, of course, in the Oval Office. And it has to be, whatever happens, a net win for Putin, right? This is what Putin has wanted to do from the beginning. Something that he has been frustrated and irritated that Biden would not allow him to do, and up to now Trump has not allowed him to do, which is sit down with, as he sees it, the other great global boss of the international power system. Sit down as if it were the Yalta Conference in 1945, and he's Stalin, and Trump is Roosevelt or Truman, and sitting down and carving up the world as they would like to see. That is exactly the vision of great power politics that Putin subscribes to, that he wants to move to, and what Trump, no matter what happens on Friday, what Trump is gifting him with a meeting with the US president for apparently no concessions or nothing in return, at least as far as we can see at the moment.
You talk about Putin and the vision. With Trump, it's about the visuals. And Trump will love the idea that this is happening in Alaska. There'll be the big handshake, the Russian flag on one side, the US stars and stripes on the other. They will come together, they'll embrace warmly, they'll sit down, there may be a news conference afterwards. And the remarkable thing from the first term was just how little came out of any of this. So, Trump had the summit in Helsinki with Putin. Trump gives a news conference afterwards and then has to apologise and walk back everything he said the next day because he had so infuriated the Republican Party. He goes to Singapore to have a summit with Kim Jong-un and then another one in Vietnam. Nothing comes out of that either. It all collapses and there is no news conference. And Trump sort of says, oh, well, we couldn't agree anything. So the tendency is that there is too little planning strategically of what the negotiation is and what we're aiming to get out of it. And the Sherpas will have done very little work on either side. Well, I think on Russia they'll have done a huge amount because they know how to play Donald Trump. And at the end of it, you fear and feel that Zelenskyy will be screwed by whatever it is that comes out of it. And I think you're right. I've seen John Bolton already saying today that this is a victory for Vladimir Putin before either of them has left. One has left Moscow and the other has left Washington.
Yeah, well, you've got to think about the kind of longer context since the start of the war, haven't you, John? Which is to say that it has been American policy and Western policy to put Vladimir Putin and the Russian state into the deep freeze, to isolate them, to not engage with them, to remove them from the international financial system, the international diplomatic system, at least as far as the West is concerned. You can argue about how successful sort of we've been at that, but nonetheless, as far as the West has been concerned, he and Russia have been pariahs. What Trump is choosing to do is to reverse, to change that long-standing policy which began under the Biden administration, and to welcome him back as a legitimate player of the great power game, right? Just the fact that they are meeting sends a signal to the world that as far as Trump is concerned, the US president is concerned, he is not beyond the pale. Bear in mind that, of course, if Putin, a bit like Benjamin Netanyahu, if Putin chose to travel to any European power, he'd be arrested. There is an international criminal court warrant out for his arrest, as the same for all of the cronies of his murderous regime. Trump is basically, in one move, absolving him of all of that and sending a signal that he is worth talking to and he should be talking to. And of course, at some point, Russia is going to have to be a negotiation and the US is going to have to be involved in that. But the card that the US had and the card that Trump had was that visual that you're talking about, that conference of legitimacy. And as far as we can see, apart from, as you say, the venue being in the United States, which Trump will love, and Putin has wisely and gamely worked out that is basically something that he can give Trump for almost nothing in return. Trump has got nothing, as far as we can see, in terms of all of the pre-briefing that is coming out that has come out of the White House over the course of the weekend.
And tempting as it is to say, well, this is purely about Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian people and what they might lose after that unprovoked invasion in February 2022, it's wider than that, because it's about the world order. It's about the right of sovereign states to exist within their own agreed borders, something that Russia kind of had previously accepted, Ukrainian sovereignty, even when Vladimir Putin was the president of Russia. I mean, you know, you can imagine that if Donald Trump is saying, yeah, I mean, you can keep the land you've taken, President Xi in China is going to be thinking, oh, Taiwan, looking nice now. You know, maybe that we can go there and we'll have no trouble. And authoritarian, autocratic leaders who feel that they've got some power will be thinking, right, that bit of land that I've always coveted, it's now, you know, open season. The UN is going to do nothing. America is going to do nothing. America is not the policeman anymore. It's the enabler.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, it's worth considering where this leaves us and Europe, right? Because we have had, I mean, you know, European powers likely to be, whether Ukraine is involved in this or not seems unlikely, but I think we can say with some certainty that European powers are not going to be involved in this. I mean, they barely appear to as if they're being consulted by the White House. You've got the French government, you've got Macron, you've got the British government, Starmer, you've got the German government with Merz, sort of bloviating a bit and sort of saying it's very, very important for European governments to be kept at the table. I have to say that my sympathy with European governments on this is limited, not in substance, because obviously, clearly, morally, politically, culturally, economically, militarily, it would be absurd and outrageous for European governments who would likely have to be at least a sort of part guarantor of whatever happens and whatever deal is kind of sort of hammered out. So it's ridiculous in one sense. But then on the other hand, you know, John, we've known the direction of travel of the White House since before the election, and certainly since the Trump Zelenskyy blow up in the Oval Office. Yeah, relations have thawed a little bit since then, but nonetheless, we've known that this is a White House that wanted to cut a deal and wasn't much bothered about what European powers thought about that deal. We've had, what is it, you know, 5 months, 6 months since that blow up. What has Europe actually done concretely to both prepare itself and Ukraine or come up with an alternative strategy? Now, you might say that that is basically impossible without the Americans, full stop. But as always with European governments, there is a hell of a lot of warm words and solidarity and bloviating about how important European security is and this, that, and the other. But when it comes down to it, the strategy has stayed the same, which is let's hope that the Americans actually sort of do the right thing after all of the other options have been exhausted, which is typically our strategy, right? That is clearly, I think, been wrong-headed for a long time. And I don't think we can be surprised that this has happened, because it has been on the cards for a long time that at some point Trump would want to meet Putin. Putin, we know, is playing Trump like a fiddle repeatedly, and it's not surprising that we're at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there's something extraordinarily transactional, it seems to me right now, about the US approach to it, where you kind of get the impression that the Americans say, okay, Europe, if you want to kind of keep on arming Ukraine, that's fine. Buy our weapons and give them to Ukraine, but don't expect us to pay for it. So, yes, American arms manufacturers will continue to do very well out of the war continuing. It's just that the Americans aren't going to pay for it. Listen to J.D. Vance in this interview he gave to Fox News.
So what we said to the Europeans is simply, first of all, this is in your neck of the woods. This is in your back door. You guys have got to step up and take a bigger role in this thing. And if you care so much about this conflict, you should be willing to play a more direct and a more substantial way in funding this war yourself. I think the president, and I certainly think that America, we're done with the funding of the Ukraine war business. We want to bring about a peaceful settlement to this thing. We want to stop the killing. But Americans, I think, are sick of continuing to send their money, their tax dollars to this particular conflict. But if the Europeans want to step up and actually buy the weapons from American producers, we're okay with that, but we're not going to fund it ourselves anymore.
We know basically at this point what the outlines of this so-called deal would be, right? Which is basically Ukraine, of course this is the Steve Witkoff proposal, Ukraine basically giving up, if not officially, but in all but name, giving up and ceding control of at least 3 to 4 regions of eastern Ukraine, freezing the front and freezing the border in a de facto sense where it is at the moment. And I think that, I mean, that clearly, that poses a profound problem for Zelenskyy, because although there is evidence now, and there's lots of polling which does suggest that weariness in Ukraine towards the war, completely unsurprisingly, 3.5 years in, has never been higher. There is more support now than there has been before for a negotiated settlement. But nonetheless, there is far less support, according to polling with the Ukrainian public and electorate, of Ukraine unilaterally ceding territory without getting anything for it in return. And so far, it seems from the contours and outline of the deal, in terms of security guarantees, in terms of putting in mechanisms to ensure that Putin can't just go home for 6 months and 12 months and come back again, it seems that Ukraine will be getting very little in return for allowing the ceasefire to come in where it is at the moment.
Yeah, and that is a huge problem for Zelensky. And also, how do you sell it to the Ukrainian people that Russia is done? You know, what guarantee would you take from Vladimir Putin saying, we now respect Ukraine's sovereignty? And there are all the questions about whether it can join the European Union, whether it can join NATO, will still be rattling around, and with the threat that Russia could come back again in a couple of years' time. Because previous undertakings from Russia about the territorial integrity of Ukraine have proved absolutely worthless. And just based on previous behaviour, you'd be stark raving bonkers to accept any undertaking from Vladimir Putin right now about the future security of an independence and sovereignty of Ukraine.
Well, I think you have to view this Alaska summit in the kind of context of everything we've seen, in particular since the Oval Office showdown between Trump and Zelenskyy, which is basically since then, what you have seen from both the Russians and from the Ukrainians is an intense set of diplomatic efforts to try and win in the court, not of public opinion, but of Trump opinion.
Yeah.
I.e., there has been a blame game going on, or a very kind of intense effort by both sides to try and win the spin war as to who is to blame, which side is to blame for the fact that there isn't a ceasefire, which is what Trump desperately wants, right? And you've seen over the course of the last 6 months the kind of, in Trump's mind, and as always with Trump, so much of this plays out completely in the public sphere, where it's sort of tapped into his kind of stream of consciousness at any given moment. We've seen Trump kind of oscillate between the two sides as to who he blames. So obviously, initially in that showdown, it was very clear that Trump believed that Zelenskyy was the one. He didn't have the cards. He was the one who was gambling with World War III. But obviously, since then, the broad trajectory has been one where we've seen and heard Trump's thinking evolve to start to think that maybe Putin is responsible, right? He said it's disappointed what he's done by Putin's actions. He's called Russian bombing of Ukrainian cities disgusting. He's mused aloud as to whether he's tapping me along. So it seems to me that this is part of that long-term blame game and that dance between the two sides. And he can say, Zelenskyy, Mr. President, we've got this deal, we've negotiated with Kov, and if the Ukrainians won't accept it, then the blame is on them. And he will hope that Trump, therefore, just washes his hands of it, that there will be no more aid forthcoming, and Russia can continue to make the small but nonetheless significant territorial gains and advances on the front that they've been doing over these last months.
I suppose there is a chance that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump don't reach agreement, and Trump, at the end of it, says, I'm very unhappy with the way Vladimir Putin has approached this. He's not serious about peace. We are now going to impose these series of tariffs that Congress has drawn up in reserve. We're going to accept that legislation, and we are going to hammer Russia really hard. I would say the chances of that are probably about 1%. I think 99% it's going to be that Trump and Putin will agree something that is just a frigging nightmare for Europe, and in particular for Ukraine and Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
Well, consider what he's on the verge of being able to do, right? What was the background to this last week? Trump was going to impose heavy sanctions, he said, on Russia. That apparently now has evaporated with the prospect of this summit. He's got his first invitation to meet with the US president on American soil for a decade. He's able to do that about Ukraine, but without Ukraine being at the table. And potentially, if Trump was to accede to the deal that Witkoff has hinted at, then potentially Putin will be able to gain land that he doesn't even currently possess and that he wouldn't even have to fight for. Art of the deal indeed.
We'll be back in a moment with a former Russian Prime Minister who's fallen out with Vladimir Putin. Well, let us speak now to Mikhail Kasyanov, who was a former Prime Minister of Russia between 2000 and 2004 when Vladimir Putin was the president. In 2006, re-entered politics to promote democratic values and counter Putin's authoritarianism. ran for president in 2008, but was disqualified on political grounds and left Russia shortly after the Ukraine invasion and was put on Russia's foreign agents list in 2023. So someone who's fallen out with Vladimir Putin, but still watching very closely. Mikhail Kasyanov, thank you so much for being with us on the News Agents. I wonder what you think is going to come out of this meeting on Friday in Alaska between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump.
I think within the last few days, that's appeared already clear, even for Americans, that upcoming scheduled meeting in Alaska, in Anchorage, would be useless. And I think just already Americans also recognize this, because just Mr. Trump will only try to somehow to convince Mr. Putin to agree on a ceasefire. Mr. Putin is not going. He has already just put on the table his terms and conditions, etc. Unacceptable for Ukrainians and unacceptable for coalition of willings, the whole European countries. That's why we should not expect any fruitful results, but some kind of diplomatic meeting. I think it will play for Mr. Putin, for his, I would say, in his favor.
So why then is Donald Trump doing it?
I don't know yet, but I think he tries to undertake this attempt. Maybe there is an opportunity that European allies, European leaders will try to convince Mr. Trump not to do this, because it's already absolutely clear that there will not be positive result. And they will explain to Mr. Trump that it's not possible to sell Ukraine without the will of Ukrainian people. And European nations also will not accept such concessions, just to make a gift for Mr. Putin as a territorial, I would say, recognition of his occupation, just simply as a condition to ceasefire. That's not acceptable for Ukrainians.
I was at the news conference that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump gave in Helsinki, in Finland, during Donald Trump's first term as president, and was really struck by how in awe Donald Trump seemed of Vladimir Putin. And given the limited goals being set for this meeting, it looks like something could repeat itself. History might repeat itself.
Yeah, I think it could be the case. That's a little bit strange. I thought Mr. Trump already just taken a lesson from that Helsinki meeting, because he was criticized heavily in the United States and in Europe too for that, for this interaction with Mr. Putin. It could really, I agree with you, just that could be repeated. That will be not in Trump's favor. He wants a deal, but he will not get this transaction, but will get the criticism. Unfortunately, the situation develops these days in this favor. People, the whole world, the European leaders, just all Russian democratically devoted people and the Ukrainians were expected just more pressure from President Trump, more pressure on Trump or on Putin. But the situation turns just in different direction. It's appeared to be he will try to please Mr. Putin with this diplomatic meeting. It could be seen as very historical, but without any positive consequences.
So the narrative seems set that Donald Trump, for whatever reason, is in awe of Vladimir Putin. But does Putin have calculations to make? Is he worried about upsetting Donald Trump?
That's exactly the point, John. Mr. Putin is already counted and just studied and knows what Mr. Trump is about. And he knows that Mr. Trump needs as soon as possible that transaction, ceasefire agreement, not just comprehensive peace agreement, which could be negotiated for months and years, but for ceasefire. That's why Mr. Putin would like just not to make angry Mr. Trump, but to please him. But he's not prepared for any concessions. That's why that would be just not acceptable meeting, not fruitful. There will be no results, positive results. That's why it would be useless.
So if Putin is not prepared to make any concessions at all, then it does seem a complete waste of time. Do you think that there are little things that Putin may offer as a concession that probably don't add up to much, but will allow Donald Trump to say, look what I've managed to wrestle from Vladimir Putin. This is a good deal. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, you should accept it.
That would be presented by Mr. Putin as exactly this case, but there will not be any concessions made by Putin. Last year just make his proposals even tougher. He said just Ukraine should withdraw their troops from remaining territories of those 4 regions. He created this additional condition last year. Maybe, I don't believe to this, but maybe just maximum what he can do just to say, I will take out this condition. But let's freeze. But he needs victory. But victory for him, that will be the total occupation of Donbass, 2 regions, Lugansk and Donetsk. Because just when he started the war in February 2022, he explained this, I'm going to liberate Russian-speaking people in Donbass. But he didn't get Donbass completely. He'd like to achieve just the Donbass territory in its totality under his control. That's why he is demanding and will be convincing Mr. Trump, just delivering lectures of Russia's history without Ukraine, etc., etc. He will try to convince Mr. Trump that is historically justified position just to take Donbass under full control. And with the expectation that Mr. Trump in return would be pressing Ukrainians just to accept this deal. Because Trump needs deal. I don't think that will work, but it is, of course, great concern among many people that Mr. Trump could go this way. That will be, in this case, awful situation.
How much pressure would Vladimir Putin be under in Russia if it was seen that he had made significant concessions over the war aims? I mean, does Vladimir Putin have to worry about his position and that people, could try to topple him if he gave too many concessions after the spilling of so much Russian blood?
In fact, any position on which the war could stop could be delivered to Russian people by Putin's propaganda as Putin's victory. That's why that is not so dangerous for him. Any position, but the problem is he wants to achieve victory just more than already he has now. The problem is why he is doing now. That was his initiative. He invited Mr. Witkoff to Moscow. He initiated the meeting with President Trump because he feels that sooner, even by the end of this year, he will face big problems in state financing. But his war that's spending a lot of money because every soldier on the battlefield get paid a lot. That's not the war for Russians. That is occupational war. And that's paid war for any soldier. And that's why he wants just to somehow to agree on ceasefire, but with his terms and with his conditions. And he explained these conditions already just to Mr. Witkoff, who just interpreted maybe just not in a very clear way initially, but clear that Putin requires just Ukrainians to leave Donbass in totality. He would like to occupy Donbass in total, so to declare Russians. You Russians, remember, I started this special military operation to liberate Russian people. Now Donbass and the Donbass people, Russian people, just under in a free Russia, something like that.
I mean, let's just assume that Putin gets that and gets an agreement from Donald Trump that is what should happen, that Donbass is returned to Russia. Is there any reason to think that Putin will be happy with that, given that there was, I think it was in 2004 or 2005, an agreement signed between Ukraine and Russia, where Russia respected Ukraine's territorial integrity and ripped it up in 2022, as you said?
Yeah, got it. Yeah, in fact, it's absolutely great question because it's very necessary to understand for all political leaders. That is not the end of the war in this case. That would be not the end of the war. Putin would just make lessons for what happened, just to get this as a relaxation for industries, will improve situation inside Russia, and and start preparing for a new escalation. new escalation could happen in a year or 2 years, etc. Because just the main goal for him to destroy independent Ukraine. He doesn't want Ukraine as independent, not under Putin's influence, to exist. Because just that could be an example for Russian people who are very close to Ukrainians. That's what Mr. Putin mostly worried about, that they could choose just the way of building up democratic state with the European values and going that direction. But for Putin, that is danger, that is a threat for his power. That is the main problem for him, the main goal for Putin, to destroy Ukraine and to be seen him and President of the United States discussing and settling the fate of the world. That's what he's dreaming about, to get this respect from everyone in the world, simply because of two reasons: that Mr. Putin has a nuclear power and a permanent seat in the Security Council. That's what he requires, just to respect him through strengths.
So is it, in your view, a mistake for Donald Trump to be meeting Vladimir Putin? You can see what Vladimir Putin wants from it, but it sounds, from what you described, that Donald Trump isn't going to get very much at all.
Yeah, I think that mistake. That's from the situation, from information what we have as of today, what Mr. Putin proposed and as described to Special Envoy Witkoff. That will be a mistake, because just there will not be any transaction. I don't like to believe that the President of the United States would be prepared to recognize that Russian under-colonial of KGB just destroyed the whole infrastructure of international security, European security. Just Russia, with the producing 2% of world's GDP, just destroyed the whole world. United States with 25%, making 25% of the world's GDP, and Europe another 25% of GDP. Half of the world's economy produced by it, and Putin destroyed. And President of the United States accepted this. I don't want to believe this. That will not happen.
Does Putin worry? You talk about the economic pressure and the cost of this war. Presumably the one thing that Putin wants to avoid above all else is for Donald Trump to impose sanctions on Russia and the Russian economy, and particularly those countries like India and China that are buying Russian oil.
Yes, that is the main pressure, because just if such sanctions won't be imposed, the tariffs 100%, that's not almost 500%. We can read it as embargo. For India, they already started to drift just again back to purchasing their oil in the Gulf. They never bought Russian oil 3 years ago, before the war started. For them, it's easier because it's spot market, and they used to do this, and they already started moving that. They don't want to destroy their relations with the United States and European Union and Great Britain. They already started to move this direction. China is a different story. China never make decision under pressure. That's why that will be different story. But even those volumes, what now just being sold to India, if they will be closed and replacement will come from other Gulf countries, that's what already negotiation took place. And America also could produce a little bit more. In this case, just Putin will have a real pressure on his budget revenue. It means ability to finance the war. Now they're running the budget with the expected 5% of GDP deficit. It's big, but not tragic. But if the revenue decreased and support for Ukraine increased, in this case, Putin have to raise his expenditure with the contracting revenue. That will be a big problem. He understands this. That's why he invited Witkoff to Moscow now and would like just somehow to settle in one or another direction with Witkoff or with Mr. Trump. But dragging out time, that's his position at this moment in any case.
Let me ask you this finally. Do you think there is any chance that this meeting doesn't happen on Friday? Because won't it look like a humiliation if Donald Trump pulls out, having been so keen to meet Vladimir Putin?
I think so. European leaders of coalition of willing, just met with Zelenskyy and discussed among themselves. They produced their statement. That's already clear. That's already clear. They will never support such a transaction made without Ukrainian and just to give up territory of Ukraine without their consent. That's already clear. It means for Mr. Trump, he will face, if he accepts Putin's proposals or Putin's conditions, Putin's demands, that will be just some kind of problem with the relations with Europe. That is, I don't think he wants this. At first, European leaders could convince Mr. Trump during remaining 4-5 days that is not useful to have it now. Let Putin just indicate what he wants to achieve, whether he is ready for concession or not. If he is not ready for concession, for Mr. Trump would be the only decision in Anchorage, just to immediately to announce, I agree with this draft law in the Congress, imposing 500% sanctions for all who purchase Russian oil and gas, so that to make a great pressure on Putin.
You think that will happen?
It should happen.
Yeah,
it should.
That's not the same as you think it will happen.
I know. I'm not saying it will happen, but it should, in a normal logic, it should happen. Mr. Trump should say just the game is over. Mr. Putin doesn't want any I would say transaction to stop the war. That will be the end of the game in Anchorage. But if he is not prepared to this, I think that the meeting should not take place.
Okay, Mikhail Kasyanov, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
The News Agents. This is a Global Player original podcast.